level.
Hi, Ron. It is an absolute honor and a privilege. One of my all-time favorite directors ever. Two-time Academy Award winner of I literally just watched Apollo 13 and it holds up. It's in the zeitgeist. It is like making a film that's indelible to culture is pretty extraordinary. So Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind. Ransom, okay, it's a little less known, but I love that film growing up as a kid. Parenthood, just saw that recently, amazing. Da Vinci Code, which is the most iconic. So real quick before we, as we're jumping in.
Thank you. By the way, I appreciate all that. Thank you. I'm glad those movies resonated with you.
I mean, I want to talk about the studio and you getting back to acting, but I was chatting with Bryce. I'm friends with your daughter. And so she had a list of questions. We had met on a plane and we figured out that I also knew Felipe Toros or so, who I
just saw Felipe in New York. He came to a screening of Eden, and it was great to catch up with Felipe.
Yeah, I did one of his first projects. I was an actor in, and he's I haven't seen him in a minute, but yeah. So I feel like we have we have a lot of connections, and then also my dear friend Tim Ross was also in your film Eden. So who I starred in a film with. But so this is some of the questions that Bryce had, which I absolutely love, which was, so you first heard about this whole story that happened with Eden, sort of this tribal we're kind of there right now, I feel like, in the world of tribalism. And it's kind of this is a perfect story to kind of tell without it being too politicized, because it's it's perfect. So what was your impression of that story, and how did that impression either strengthen or change once you started filming and doing research on the subject?
Well, Bryce was there on this vacation in the Galapagos when we went to this museum together as a family, and saw the story of what they called the Galapagos affair, which was this crazy mixture of people who were trying to go off the grid separately, go to this desert island and reinvent themselves to get away from the rising fascism in Germany and the depression worldwide and the looming possibility of another world war, and they just wanted to get the hell out. And so this is an object lesson. This is like a case study of this. It's like a season of the TV show Survivor, except people actually disappeared and died, on this story. But as we were watching this, Bryce literally said, "Dad, I think this is a movie, don't you?" And I said, "Maybe it's dark and edgy, and I haven't done anything like that." And she said, "Great parts." And oh, right, great roles for people. And the story just continued to stay with me. You asked, how was I surprised? Well, 15 years ago, it didn't feel as relevant, sadly, as it does today.
Yeah.
If you search off the grid, it's one of the most sought after links on the internet, and there's a reason. And but the other thing is, as I began to understand the story, do more and more research, work with the writer Noah Pink, and more importantly, I think really work with the actors Ana de Armas, Sydney Sweeney, and Vanessa Kirby on their roles, I began to see that the women really changed the most, and their dynamics shifted more dramatically as individuals than any of the other characters. And I was really proud by the end of the sort of the journey that these characters all went on, and I think it's very much the truth based on what the survivors wrote about each other and those on the island, the way journalists covered the story back then, mm-hmm. and what the actors and I could sort of flesh out as we worked on these scenes. So I think I'm really proud of the women and their performances. They really they just creatively brought so much to the movie.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it was the women who changed the most? And do you think, you know how like you're doing alchemy constantly when you're on set. And when I think of like Apocalypse Now, I think of like, sometimes it's like when you're channeling these energies, it can mirror like behind the scenes, like everyone almost died on Apocalypse Now. So was there anything that they're conjuring, that they're bringing in, that like it mirrored, you know, the experience of filming, how life imitates art?
Even though we were going home to hotel rooms at night, the filming was rugged. It was an indie movie. There was no soundstage. There was no air conditioning. We were out in it while we were filming. And so, you know, that's 12 hours of the day. The rest of the time, fortunately, was a little more comfortable. But it, you know, it was grueling, and they could certainly relate to just the aches, pains, the struggle, the exposure, the threat of nature. In our instance, poisonous snakes and spiders, which had to be looked out for constantly, and sometimes gently, humanely, and carefully removed and transported to a safer place away from us. But I really think it was because in that era, but to an extent still today, two of the women went trying to serve the men in their life. And ultimately, in order to attempt to survive, they had to outgrow the men, and in a way, and assert themselves. As my wife Cheryl said, they had to sort of become the alphas in order to try to survive in this survival struggle. I don't want to give anything away, but it's kind of like who makes it and who doesn't. Like a season of Survivor is part of the game of watching the movie. And I think the outcomes are a little bit surprising. And
this story like hooked you from, according to Bryce, for a decade. Like, yeah. So, and how, what was it about the story that hooked you for that amount of time? Because like, you know, these stories and ideas can like grab hold of you. And
I've done a lot of movies based on real events, and they can be edgy. And morally a little murky at times, but ultimately they're celebratory. Ultimately centrally it's about triumph. And while yes, some characters in this movie survive and others don't, it's not really about that. It really is about the journey and the darkness and the edginess of it. And it is a true crime thriller, meaning it's violent in places. And yes, I've had violence in movies, but I've never had it as pure and intense and so focused thematically and connected to the characters as this one. Other filmmakers have done it, and I admire those movies, but I've never tried one. And I felt like that what these people lived is such an organically classic collision of characters that it was just a natural movie in a lot of ways, and a challenge that I really wanted to try to tackle.
Yeah, you're sort of like, I mean, because I feel like we're in a world where it's very us versus them. It's very tribal. And I mean, I feel like just seeing the trailer really embodies that. And, you know, because I love the pitch of how it's not about climate change, or it's not about it's not about the animals and the wildlife. It's about dealing with each other and the shadows that come up with each other. How do you... Yeah, I guess navigating the shadows. I mean, like, I guess that's always like the question of, you know, when you're diving into stories and telling these stories. And so how do you like navigating those kind of stories? Like when you're exposing the shadow, like what is sort of your message with that?
In reality, every story you're ever going to tackle, whether it's a comedy or a fantasy, whether it's for kids or adults, whether it's a drama based on real events or fiction, is ultimately about people being tested. They're either subjecting themselves to a test, which is the case here with Eden, or they're being tested by an outside force that is not welcome, but they're having to deal with it. And the reason we love stories is because we need to see what happens to people when they're tested. And we need to then compare their situation to ours. Look, How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a test. It's a test of characters for the Who's and also the Grinch. It's comical. It's hilarious. Jim Carrey gave a great comedy performance, but it's all driven by the conflict and the way that each character is pushed to their limits and tested. So Eden was an example of that. It just gives it extra power when you say it's true. And when you also look at it and say, sometimes even sympathetic people are forced to make brutal decisions, and it's fascinating. It can even be fun if you're playing along with the game, but it can also be a little shocking and a little unsettling because it's not necessarily what you expected of that character. And so I think that's why these elite actors wanted to jump in here, because the characters are all very dimensionalized. They're paradoxes, and they make some tough decisions. And I think we understand what's motivating it, but you may not always agree with the decision they make.
Yeah. And real quick, I know we probably have to jump soon, but you put your wife, since you were 16, you sneak her in the background as an extra. How did you manage to do that in this film in a desert?
Well,
do people know about this? Because Bryce told me and I was like, wait, what?
Well, we don't talk about it too much, but we don't hide the fact. But yeah, she's appeared in every scripted film that I've ever done, or television show. Not the documentaries, obviously, but every scripted project she's appeared in, and in this case, it's become a good luck charm for me. She doesn't care; it's not her favorite thing, but she's willing. She's willing. In this case, we had no female extras. We had at one point a crew arrives of explorers, and this led by this extremely wealthy individual, Hancock of Hancock Park, by the way, who actually visited and is shot a lot of the movies and photographs of the characters, which is why we know so much about them today. And so I said to Cheryl, you're going to have to be a dude. You gotta, tuck your hair in. We'll give you a wig, a little mustache. And so when the yacht arrives and they have this gathering, on the beach, this sort of celebration, he throws a little banquet, a little feast for these people who need a good meal. Cheryl is suddenly Charlie, who's a guy with a little red mustache, a little short, maybe a little effete, but very efficient, very, very efficient with the tray and the drinks.
That's incredible. Oh my God. Ron, thank you. Okay. Thank you. This was an absolute pleasure. And please go see Eden. I'm so excited to see it.
Bye-bye. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, guys. If you like that episode, please comment, like, and subscribe and share so we can get on that algorithm and you can see more of our latest episodes. That was a fun one. I love Ron Howard.
A whole nother level.